The golden hush of twilight settled gently over the hills of Santa Reina, a coastal town that wore its calm like perfume, delicate, deceiving. On the edge of that calm, Naomi Carter clipped the leash onto her dog's collar and whispered a single word, ready. Shadow, an imposing Belgian Malinois with sharp, intelligent eyes, didn't bark. He simply stood, steady, silent, loyal. His black and bronze coat shimmered faintly in the low sunlight, and his ears twitched to the rhythm of Naomi's breath. They had walked this trail for years, a winding coastal path that wrapped like a ribbon along the sandstone cliffs, where the ocean whispered secrets only those who walked alone could hear. But tonight, something in the air felt wrong. Not loud, no. Wrong never shouted in places like this. It seeped in slowly, soft as fog. And Naomi, a retired professor who had learned to read the unsaid, felt it settle into her bones. She adjusted the scarf at her neck, her fingers brushing against the dog tags resting just below her collarbone. They weren't hers, they belonged to Jasmine, her wife, her anchor, her storm, and they hadn't left Naomi's skin since the funeral. Jasmine had trained Shadow herself during her years as an Air Force canine handler. She used to joke, "This dog doesn't follow orders, he follows hearts, and you've got the only one left." That had been 2 years ago. Cancer had taken Jasmine in 8 months. Naomi had spent every moment since walking the line between grief and grace, letting Shadow remind her of everything Jasmine once believed, that power didn't need noise, and dignity could survive even the sharpest silences. Santa Reina had changed since then. It wasn't the architecture. Those white adobe facades and manicured hedges remained untouched. It wasn't the sea breeze that still carried salt and warmth. It was the looks, the way smiles turned into nod, the way nods turned into nothing. People Naomi had taught, neighbors who had eaten at her table, now moved like she was a ghost that dared not fade. And she understood. Or at least she thought she did. The country was tired, angry, and divided. But Naomi had lived through 5 decades of being told she didn't belong. She had tenure. She had a PhD. She had worn black gowns in Ivy League halls and walked out of courtrooms holding students who'd been arrested for simply asking why. This town, with its wine tastings and art walks, didn't scare her. But tonight, as she turned the corner past Mission Ridge, her breath caught, not from the climb, but from what she saw. A black and white patrol car, lights off, engine quietly purring beneath the hood. It sat still 2 blocks down, unmoving, watching. Shadow stopped too. Naomi didn't slow her stride. She didn't falter. But her grip on the leash tightened just slightly, and her jaw set the way it had back in 1987 when a dean asked her if she'd earned her position or been selected for diversity. She had learned long ago that power expects you to flinch first. The cruiser didn't move, but she felt a shift, like a tide pulling back before it surged. Her feet struck the pavement with rhythm now. 1, 2, 1, 2. Her eyes stayed ahead, but her body read the street like scripture. Every porch light, every curtain that twitched, every alley was too still. Jasmine's voice lived in her memory now, firm as ever. Walk like you own the ground. Walk like their gaze can't erase you. So Naomi walked. Shadow, sensing the unease, adjusted his pace, his movements less relaxed now, more exact. As they passed the edge of Del Mar Street, Naomi caught the glint of sunglasses behind the patrol windshield. Not a wave, not a nod, just a stare. She exhaled through her nose. Not today. But somewhere deep inside her chest, the memory of Jasmine's final lesson pulsed. They'll try to corner you with quiet, but if you carry your truth, the silence becomes yours. Naomi pressed forward into the dying light, Shadow close by her side. The sky bled into indigo, and the wind picked up, cool, ocean-worn, and indifferent. She had no idea that someone was already watching from above. A teenage boy on his rooftop, drone in hand, adjusting a camera gimbal for practice. His name was Micah Lewis. He didn't know her name yet, but he would. Because before the night was done, this quiet walk would no longer be hers alone. The morning sun in Santa Reina rose with its usual performance. Soft amber spilling across white stucco walls, breeze dancing through the eucalyptus trees, and shadows stretching lazily across manicured lawns. But Naomi Carter noticed something else when she stepped outside. The silence. Not the peaceful kind. The brittle kind. The kind that follows you to the curb. Shadow padded silently beside her, his nose twitching as he scanned the wind like a soldier searching for patterns. Naomi bent down and clipped the leash again, her movements unhurried but deliberate. She had spent a lifetime training people to recognize tone, subtext, and omission. Now her neighborhood was speaking in half gestures and double meanings. Across the street, her neighbor Jeanette usually waved. Today, she tugged her watering can a little closer and kept her eyes on the soil. Naomi didn't take it personally. She'd stopped doing that years ago, but she noted it. The avoidance wasn't random. Something was shifting. Shadow's head turned slightly. Naomi followed his gaze. Same cruiser. Parked across from the local cafe this time, its windows blacked out as if to pretend they weren't watching. But they were, she could feel it. The weight of a gaze too practiced to be casual. Sergeant Clay Brenner leaned against the driver's door, arms folded, sunglasses on, despite the overcast sky. Officer Drew Watkins lounged on the hood, one hand spinning his baton like a coin. And behind them, Officer Matt Riley stared down at his phone, but his eyes flicked up every few seconds. Naomi knew theater when she saw it. This wasn't a patrol, it was present. Still, she walked forward with her head high. The kind of high that came from having nothing left to prove. "Morning, ma'am," Clay called, tone sugary, stretched too thin to be sincere. Naomi didn't slow. "Officers," she replied, her voice smooth as glass. "Big dog," Drew added, his baton tapping against his leg. "Sure, he's not too much for you?" Naomi didn't answer that one. Shadow was walking slightly ahead of her, still on a short leash, but his body language was no longer relaxed. His shoulders squared, his ears tuned in. Something in the air was sour, and he knew it. "You always walk him here?" Clay asked, stepping forward, not enough to block, just enough to suggest. Naomi stopped. She turned with measured stillness, her eyes scanning each of their faces before resting squarely on Clay's. "He's trained to protect," she said plainly, "and to recognize escalation." There was a beat, a flicker in Clay's smirk, a crack in the practice swagger. Drew snorted behind him, clearly waiting for permission to laugh. It didn't come. "We've had some concerns," Clay continued, recovering. "A few residents are nervous about a large, trained dog in the neighborhood." "He's always on a leash," Naomi replied, "as required by law." "Still," Clay shrugged, "perception matters." "Then maybe you should worry about what your presence is doing to mine." Clay's smile vanished, just for a second. Then it snapped back in place like a cheap mask. "Enjoy your walk, Professor," he muttered. Naomi didn't respond. She simply walked past them, shadow glued to her side. As she turned onto Carrillo Street, a woman pushing a stroller crossed to the other side without looking up. A man walking a Labrador turned around and took a different path entirely. Naomi felt the chill of isolation crawl across her spine. Not fear, but that dull echo of being watched, doubted, othered. Again. She passed the corner bookstore. David, the boy who usually greeted her by name, now ducked behind the counter. The absence of eye contact was louder than a door slam. Naomi felt it all but said nothing. She saved her breath for the hill that rose behind the courthouse park, her favorite place to stop and sit. She used to bring Jasmine here during treatments, back when the world still seemed willing to meet them halfway. The bench was still there. So was the old iron fence. And today, the stillness buzzed. She sat. Shadow sat too. The leash rested between her fingers. Her hand never left the tags around her neck. Two women walked past. Their conversation halted mid-sentence. One looked down, the other clutched her purse. Naomi exhaled through her nose and reached for her phone. She opened a voice memo. Jasmine's voice crackled to life. Walk like they can't rewrite who you are. She listened to the 12-second clip, twice, then tucked the phone away. Shadow was still alert, and she knew now, with growing certainty, this wasn't casual. This wasn't a coincidence. They were studying her, waiting for a mistake. But Naomi Carter had watched her entire life, and not once had she let someone else define what they saw. Not then, not now, and not with a trained guardian by her side. By the third day, Naomi stopped pretending it was a coincidence. The same patrol car, the same three men, different street, different time, same eyes. Too steady to be casual, too quiet to be clean. It wasn't fear that kept Naomi awake that night. It was preparation. She had taught entire generations of students how to read intention, in language, in posture, in patterns. And these men, Brenner, Watkins, Riley, they had stopped pretending they were on duty. Now they were just watching her, waiting. She charged her phone, cleared its memory, and clipped a small GoPro onto Shadow's leash. Not because she was paranoid, because she was aware. Camille used to say, hope is a soft thing. Evidence is a shield. Naomi knew better than to walk into shadows without armor. The next evening, she avoided her usual route. Instead of the coastal trail, she turned down Laguna Drive, a less traveled road that looped behind the abandoned mission grounds. It was quieter there, more trees than people, more wind than traffic. Camille had once called it sacred space, a place that didn't ask you to earn your belonging. Titan's stride, measured steady, told her he felt it too. They moved like they always had, partners, protectors, the last remnants of a life they'd built around survival and grace. She didn't hear the cruiser first. She felt it, that low hum, that rolling pressure in the air before a predator pounces. Naomi turned slightly, headlights off, engine crawling. No lights, no sirens. Just three uniforms in a moving shadow, trying not to be seen, but failing. This time, they didn't park on a street corner. This time, they rolled to a stop 10 feet behind her. Shadow stopped and growled. It was the kind of growl that came from blood memory, from training, grief, and instinct fused into one. Naomi didn't speak. Her fingers tightened on the leash, her pulse calm but climbing. Clay Brenner stepped out first. He adjusted his belt like it mattered, ran a hand over his neatly trimmed hair, then walked forward with a practiced casualness that had menace tucked inside it. Drew Watkins followed, baton already out, spinning it slowly. Matt Riley stayed in the car. That told Naomi everything. This wasn't a patrol. This was a performance. "Evening, Professor Carter," Brenner called, his voice shrubed thick. "Out for another power walk?" Naomi didn't answer. Shadow stood at her side, still growling, low, steady, waiting. Brenner kept walking. "Dog's looking a little tense," he said, voice dipped in mock concern. "Sure he's safe for the public?" Naomi's gaze never wavered. "He's trained to respond to escalation," she said quietly. Watkins smirked. "Oh? That a threat?" "No," Naomi said. "That's a fact." Brenner took another step. "Ma'am, we've had complaints. Something about you intimidating residents, walking an aggressive animal, refusing to answer basic questions." "I've answered every lawful question," she replied. "And Shadow is not aggressive unless provoked." Watkins stepped closer. "Let's test that, shall we?" He reached toward her, the tags around her neck. "A mistake." Naomi didn't speak. She simply gave a single word. "Guard." In an instant, Shadow shifted. Not an attack, not a lunge, but a barrier. One paw forward. teeth bared, head low, shoulders squared. Every inch of him coiled, silent thunder. Watkins jerked his hand back. Brenner's hand flew to his weapon. Naomi didn't flinch. I wouldn't, she said. You're being recorded, multiple angles. She didn't point, didn't need to. Brenner looked up, finally saw it. A small drone, blinking red, hangs silently in the air, just high enough to capture the scene without being heard. Its lens stared straight down at three white officers cornering a black woman with a who hadn't moved an inch. Whose drone? Watkins barked. Naomi smiled faintly. Does it matter? You brought the theater. Someone else brought an audience. Behind them, Riley stepped out of the cruiser. He didn't speak. He didn't move. His face was pale, his eyes locked on the dog, who still hadn't blinked. You planned this, Brenner muttered. Naomi's voice was calm. No, but I stopped being unprepared. The silence that followed was sharper than any threat. Brenner adjusted his collar. Watkins muttered something Naomi didn't catch. Riley stayed still. Naomi gave her next command, quiet but firm. Heel. Shadow returned to her side, still watching, still humming with contained force. Naomi turned and walked away. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. The leash stayed steady in her hand, the night closing softly around her like a curtain. But in the stillness, she knew. The line had been crossed, and someone had finally seen it. Naomi Carter didn't check social media that night. She didn't need to. By the time she got home, the signs were already shifting, like the pressure drop before a storm. 3 missed calls from a former student. A voicemail from Deputy Mariah Lake, quiet but clipped. Naomi, you need to call me back. Now. And a text from a number she didn't recognize. Professor Carter, is this you in the drone video? She didn't reply. Instead, she made Shadow his dinner, same scoop of dry food, same spoonful of bone broth, and sat with him while he ate. Her hands were steady, but her chest buzzed with the cold voltage of something larger moving in the dark. At 10:47 p.m., her email pinged. Subject, urgent, Santa Barbara Tribune press inquiry. Naomi didn't open it. Instead, she opened her front door, stepped onto the porch, breathed. The sky was clear, the stars indifferent. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, a car door slammed. Life moved on. But her street felt different now, watched, waited upon. And the world, for once, was looking back. Inside, her laptop screen glowed with the unmistakable thumbnail. Drone footage. Grainy, unstable, but damning. 3 officers surrounded a lone woman and her silent sentinel. No audio, no narration. Just body language, positioning, and one subtle but seismic shift. When power met a wall and didn't know what to do next. The video was 94 seconds long, and it was about to make Naomi visible in a way she had never asked for. By sunrise, the footage had 28,000 views. By 10 o'clock a.m., it had doubled. News outlets called it drone dog standoff. Others used harsher terms, intimidation or interference. Woman provokes officers with war dog, and the ugliest one yet. Former professor confronts cops. Is it race baiting or real fear? Naomi's inbox was full, so was her voicemail. Some were warm. You stood your ground. Thank you. You're not alone. We see you. Others were knives. Next time we won't hesitate. You people are always crying wolf. Try that in a real town and see what happens. She ignored them all, but she did listen to one message. It was from Layla Carson, Assistant District Attorney. Ms. Carter, we've opened an internal inquiry, but I need to ask if you are willing to give a formal statement. If you want to press charges, we'll need more than video. Naomi didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to Shadow. He sat near the window, watching the birds, his body calm, his mind alert. He didn't understand fame. He didn't understand virality, but he understood loyalty, presence, energy. He knew something had changed. Naomi sat beside him. What do you think, partner? She asked aloud, her voice soft. Shadow turned to her and thumped his tail once. The first person to knock on Naomi's door was not a journalist or lawyer. It was 12-year-old Malik, the boy from 2 blocks down, who once forgot his backpack in her driveway and apologized like he'd committed a felony. He held a sketchbook. "I drew you," he said, in shadow. Naomi blinked. "You did?" He nodded. "My mom said you were brave. I saw the video. I didn't know dogs could do that. Be calm, but still protect yourself like that." Naomi knelt slowly, opened the sketch pad. It was rough, yes, but there she was, standing tall, in shadow, chest out, eyes fierce, between her and 3 looming silhouettes drawn in jagged strokes. She swallowed. "Thank you," she whispered. Malik looked up. "Are you scared now?" Naomi paused. "Yes," she said truthfully, "but not one of them." "Then of what?" "Of what happens next." That night, the Santa Barbara City Council held an emergency session. Dozens gathered outside City Hall, some to protest, others to protect, some just to gawk. Signs waved, "Walk with Naomi." "Our streets, our truth." "Who are they protecting?" News vans idled like vultures. Deputy Lake arrived unannounced at Naomi's home just past 9 p.m. Her face was tight, her uniform wrinkled. She'd been working for 14 hours straight. "They're suspending Brenner and Watkins temporarily," she said. "But you should know it's going to get louder. You're already being blamed. They're saying you trained that dog to bait them." Naomi didn't flinch. "I trained him to recognize cowardice wrapped in authority," she replied. "He's very good at his job." Mariah almost smiled, almost. Then she added, "The DA is calling for a public testimony, full review. We want this to go to court." Naomi looked down at the tags resting against her collarbone. She thought of Camille and nodded. "I'll speak." The courtroom didn't look like justice. It looked like routine. Gray carpeting, fluorescent lights humming overhead, too many chairs with too little truth ever spoken in them. But when Naomi Carter stepped onto the witness stand, the room leaned forward. Even the silence felt respectful, uncertain, like it knew something rare had just entered its space. She wore navy blue, not black, not gray. Navy, a color Camille once said carried dignity without apology. Naomi didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. The truth had never left her bones. Layla Carson, the ADA, stood with a clipboard but barely glanced at it. "Ms. Carter," she began, "in your own words, can you tell us what happened on the evening of August 17th? Naomi nodded slowly, and then she spoke, not with performance, not with anger, but with precision. She spoke of the walk, the cruiser, the slow encroachment, the baton, the reaching hand, the command. She described it all not as a threat, but as a pattern, a quiet corrosion that had been allowed to fester behind closed doors and badge numbers. And then she said this, "I did not bring a weapon that night. I brought a leash. I brought memory. I brought a bus trained not to attack but to shield. I brought presence, and I refused to hand that presence over." There was a hush afterward, the kind that feels thick in the lungs, when Layla asked, "And what would you say to those who believe you escalated the situation?" Naomi paused, then answered, "You can only escalate something that wasn't already designed to end with you on the ground." Gasps rippled quietly. Even the judge blinked once. The defense tried to pivot. They called it misinterpretation, overreaction. They said officers were under pressure, that the situation looked more tense than it was. They suggested Naomi may have misread the officer's tone. Then they brought up Titan. "A military-trained animal can be dangerous," the lawyer argued. Naomi didn't flinch. "He was trained to protect a nation," she replied, "but he spent his life protecting me. And in that moment, he wasn't the dangerous one. The danger was the silence behind the badge." When the drone footage played, the entire room shifted again. Three men circling one woman, a growl, a still body, the barely concealed aggression in a hand reaching out. Then stillness again. Naomi not retreating, not advancing, simply standing. The footage ended. The jury didn't look at the officers. They looked at her. When the verdict was read, it came like thunder wrapped in cotton. Guilty, guilty, guilty on unlawful intimidation, on abuse of power, on falsifying reports of resistance. Clay Brenner lowered his head. Drew Watkins leaned back like he'd been struck by wind. Matt Riley? He simply sat there, eyes hollow, hands trembling against his knees. Naomi didn't celebrate. She breathed. Outside, the crowd had grown, dozens now spilling onto the sidewalk. Some held signs. Others simply stood with their hands over their hearts. When Naomi stepped out, she didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just looked at every face, every stranger who had decided not to look away. And then she knelt beside Shadow, who was waiting by the courthouse doors, his tail swaying once in recognition. "We held the line," she whispered into his fur. And that was all. Moral of the story. Naomi Carter never asked to become a symbol. She didn't march or shout. She didn't lead a protest or wave a banner. She simply walked with dignity, with memory, and with a voice whose silence spoke louder than sirens. But when a system tried to corner her with shadows and assumptions, she didn't shrink. She stood. That's the lesson we carry forward. Power does not always bark. Bravery does not always roar. Sometimes it walks, deliberately, quietly, undefeated. And when the world tries to decide who you are before you speak, the most radical thing you can do is speak anyway. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you that standing still can be its form of protest, don't let it end here. Like, share, subscribe. Not because of virality, but because someone somewhere is walking alone. And they need to know they're not.